Imagine that one day you find yourself in the post-war American frontier on the endless plains of Texas in the late 1860s. The Civil War has just ended. The South is devastated, cities are deserted, and plantations are in debt. But millions of semi-wild longhorn cattle roam the pastures of Texas. During the war, almost no one bought them, and now there are so many cattle that a single bull fetches only $3 to $4. But in the north, in Kansas, things are different. The railroads have already arrived there. In cities like Abilene and Dodge City, workers, builders, and soldiers need meat. There, the same bull can cost $30 to $40. And between these two worlds lie almost 1,000 kilometers of prairies, rivers, Indian territories, and dangers. That is why every spring a great movement begins. The cattle drive to the north. And you find yourself among those who are setting out on this journey. You are barely 20 years old. The war is over, but it has left behind only dust, debt, and ruined farms. There is little work and almost no money. So, when the ranch owner announces that he is hiring cowboys for a big drive to Kansas, you don't think twice. The pay is $30 a month and food. For a young guy on the frontier, that's not bad money. The ranch wakes up before dawn. The air smells of leather saddles, campfire smoke, and cattle. Thousands of long-horned bulls moo in their pens. They need to be driven north along the Chisholm Trail, the most famous route of those years. The trail boss is the senior member of the group, a stern and taciturn man. He is responsible for everything: the route, the people, the money, and the cattle itself. He has about a dozen cowboys under his command. Among them are war veterans, Mexican vaqueros, several former soldiers, and even one boy who is barely 17. Each has his own past, but now they are united by one thing: the road north. You are given a horse, a saddle, and a rifle. A revolver hangs from your belt. But a cowboy's main tools are not weapons. They are a lasso, patience, and the ability to stay in the saddle for 16 hours a day. The drive begins slowly. Thousands of bulls kick up clouds of dust. The column stretches for miles. At the front are the point riders who set the direction. On the sides are the swing riders who keep the herd together. At the rear are the drag riders, who have the hardest job because that's where the thick dust and the most stubborn animals are. And that's where you're sent. Dust gets in your eyes, mouth, and clothes. After a few hours, you realize that the romance of cowboy life exists only in stories. In reality, it's heat, fatigue, and the endless noise of thousands of hooves. But ahead lies Kansas, and that means money. However, experienced cowboys sitting around the campfire talk about other things. They talk about what might await them on the way, about turbulent rivers like the Red River, about nighttime stampedes when thousands of bulls can break into a mad dash, about thunderstorms that frighten the animals, and about the lands of Indian tribes through which the trail passes. One old cowboy says quietly, looking into the fire, "The real journey doesn't begin in Texas. It begins after the first 100 miles. You don't know what he means yet, but you'll find out soon enough. Because ahead of you lie 3 months on the road, thousands of head of cattle, and thousands of ways to die on the plains." The column begins to move before dawn. Morning comes slowly on the plains of Texas. First the gray sky, then the cold wind, and only then does the sun appear on the horizon. But the cowboys are already in the saddle. You quickly understand the main rule of cattle driving. Cattle cannot be driven quickly. If the herd gets tired, it loses weight, which means it loses value. Therefore, the average drive is only 15 to 20 kilometers per day, sometimes less. Thousands of long-horned bulls move slowly like a living river. Each cowboy takes his place. You are back in the drag, at the tail end of the herd. It is the most thankless job. There is always a thick cloud of dust raised by thousands of hooves. After a few hours, your face is covered in dirt. Your lips are chapped from the dry wind, and your clothes are gray, but no one complains. Because everyone here knows that tomorrow they could be assigned to an even worse job, night duty. The trail boss rides ahead. Next to him is the ramrod, his right-hand man. They watch the road and choose a place to camp. And somewhere to the side, a strange wagon moves slowly along, the chuck wagon. It is driven by the cook. They call him the cookie. And although he does not participate in the drive, everyone knows that the cook is one of the most important people in the expedition. He stores food, prepares meals, and carries a box with the cowboy's personal belongings. The menu hardly ever changes. Beans, salted pork, coffee, crackers, sometimes stewed meat. But after a day in the saddle, even such food seems like a real feast. By noon, the sun turns the prairie into a scorching oven. The air shimmers above the grass. Horses breathe heavily, and bulls begin to get nervous. The trail boss signals to stop at the stream. The herd is slowly driven to the water. The cowboys dismount and can straighten their backs for the first time that day. You notice how the experienced riders silently check the girths, horses' hooves, and ropes. Everything here is based on discipline, because any disorder can end in disaster. In the evening, the herd is gathered into a circle. This is called a bed ground, a place to spend the night. The bulls lie down in a dense mass, slowly chewing the grass, but not everyone rests. Every night, the cowboys take turns on duty. Two riders slowly ride around the herd, humming quietly. This is an old cowboy trick. A calm voice helps the animals not to be frightened. That night, it's your turn. You ride in a circle in the dark. A huge sky studded with stars hangs over the plain. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howl. Your partner says quietly, "The main thing is not to let the herd get scared." You ask, "What are they afraid of?" He smiles. "Thunderstorms, gunshots, coyotes, or even rabbits." You think he's joking, but suddenly one of the bulls jumps up, then another. Somewhere in the middle of the herd, you hear an anxious mooing. The horses begin to shift nervously. The experienced cowboy instantly straightens up in the saddle and says quietly, "I hope it doesn't start." Because if the herd breaks into a panic run, a stampede, then several thousand bulls can turn the night into a living hell. And it is on this very night that you understand for the first time why many cowboys never return from the drive. The night on the plains seems calm until a stampede occurs. You ride in a circle around the lying herd. The moon illuminates thousands of long-horned bulls. They lie close together, almost motionless. Sometimes you can hear only the quiet chewing of grass and the jingle of harnesses. Your partner quietly hums an old cowboy song. This is a custom that originated with the Mexican vaqueros. A calm melody soothes the cattle. And suddenly, a sound. Somewhere in the darkness there is a sharp crack. Perhaps a branch has broken. Perhaps a coyote has been startled. Sometimes even a flash of lightning is enough. But for the herd, that's enough. One bull jumps up, then another. And in a second, it all happens at once. Thousands of animals rise to their feet. First, there is a dull rumble. Then, the real thunder of hooves. The herd begins to move, then turns into a seething wave of horns and bodies. "Stampede!" your partner shouts. The horses surge forward. If the herd runs out of control, it can run for tens of kilometers until it crashes into a ravine or river. And then hundreds of animals will die, and sometimes people too. The cowboys jump into their saddles almost instantly. Some ride ahead, others try to circle around the herd from the side. The trail boss shouts commands in the darkness, drowning out the pounding of hooves. But the herd is already galloping. The ground shakes beneath you. The air is filled with dust and the smell of animals. The moon disappears behind the clouds, and all you can see is a moving mass of horns. Your partner shouts, "Go around them! We need to turn the herd around. That's the only way to stop a stampede." The cowboys try to gradually turn the front of the herd into a circle. If the animals start running in a circle, their speed will decrease and the panic will subside. But this is extremely dangerous because the rider has to get almost right up close to thousands of running bulls. You squeeze the reins and guide your horse forward. The wind hits your face. Dust stings your eyes. Your heart is beating so loudly that it seems you can hear it over the thunder of hooves. You catch up with the edge of the herd. Another cowboy appears beside you, a war veteran named Harper. He shouts, "Stay close!" You begin to move along the edge of the running herd, gradually shifting toward its head. It lasts a few minutes, but it feels like an eternity. Finally, the first bulls begin to turn, then a few more. The herd slowly curves, the rumbling becomes less chaotic. The animals begin to run in a wide circle. Half an hour later, it's over. The herd is breathing heavily and gradually lies down on the grass again. The cowboys silently stop their horses. Some laugh with relief. Others just sit in the saddle, trying to catch their breath. Harper looks at you and says, "Now you're a real cowboy." But as dawn begins to light up the plain, it becomes clear that the night has taken its toll. Several bulls lie dead. They fell during the run. One horse has broken its leg, and one of the cowboys has disappeared. The trail boss sends people to look for his tracks, and soon it becomes clear. The herd could carry a person many kilometers into the darkness, but there are still thousands of miles to go, and this was only the first real danger on the Chisholm Trail. Soon the cowboys will face another problem, the wide Red River, where no less cattle perish than in nighttime panics. By morning, the herd is moving north again. Almost no one mentions the night aloud. There is an unspoken rule on the trail. If you survive the danger, just keep going. But you notice that the cowboys have become more attentive. Now, no one laughs loudly or relaxes in the saddle. Everyone knows that ahead lies one of the most dangerous obstacles on the entire Chisholm Trail, the Red River. This river separates Texas and Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. It is wide, murky, and treacherous. The banks often turn into deep mud, and the current can suddenly strengthen after rain. It is here that many drives have lost dozens or even hundreds of head of cattle. By noon, you see the river for the first time. It seems calm, a wide strip of dark water between clay banks. But experienced cowboys do not trust this calm. The trail boss examines the crossing site for a long time. He checks the depth, goes down to the water, and observes the current. Several cowboys enter the river on horseback to check the bottom. The problem is that cattle are afraid of water. Thousands of animals do not want to enter the river, and if the herd moves too quickly, the front bulls may drown, and the ones behind will simply trample them. Therefore, everything is done slowly. The cowboys begin to gradually lead the herd to the shore. Several experienced riders enter the water first to show the way. You stand to the side, keeping the animals from running away. The first bull stares at the water for a long time and finally takes a step. Then the second. And suddenly, as if on cue, dozens of animals begin to enter the river. The water quickly becomes muddy from their hooves. Horns and heads rise above the surface like small islands. But after a few minutes, things don't go according to plan. In the middle of the river, the current is stronger than expected. Several bulls begin to panic. They turn around, collide with each other, and try to get back out. The herd behind continues to push forward. The water is churning. Someone shouts, "They're breaking formation!" If panic sets in, the animals will start swimming chaotically, colliding and drowning. The trail boss gives the order instantly. The cowboys rush into the water. You steer your horse into the river. The cold water rises almost to the saddle. The horse paddles heavily with its legs. Dozens of bulls surround you. Their huge horns are barely visible above the murky water. One of the animals begins to drown and kicks desperately. The horse is nervous, but you keep it close to the herd, guiding the animals to the opposite bank. The minutes drag on endlessly. Finally, the front bulls begin to make their way to the other side. One by one, they climb onto the clay, snorting heavily and shaking off the water. Gradually, the flow of animals slows down. When the last bull emerges from the water, the cowboys finally allow themselves to catch their breath. The losses turn out to be less than they could have been. 6 drowned bulls. For such a large herd, that's almost lucky. But when you reach the shore, Harper looks north and says quietly, "Now the real journey begins, because ahead lies Indian territory, lands where the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, and Comanche tribes live. Many of them allowed the cattle drives to pass through their lands, but sometimes conflicts still arose. In addition, horse thieves and bandits often appear here, hunting for herds and cowboys' horses. The trail boss orders everyone to keep their weapons close at hand, and for the first time on the entire journey, you notice that many cowboys are starting to sleep with their revolvers by their sides. Because in these lands, danger can come not only from nature, sometimes it comes from the darkness of the camp in the middle of the night. After crossing the Red River, the plain changes. The grass becomes taller, the hills gentler, and trees appear more frequently. This is already Indian territory, lands where many tribes were relocated after the resettlement policy of the 1830s. The Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. Cowboys know that they need to be careful here. Most tribes do not fight with cattle drivers. Moreover, sometimes Native Americans even trade with caravans, sell horses, or help find safe fords across rivers. But there is still a lot of tension in these lands. After the Civil War, the region is full of former soldiers, bandits, and outlaws. Sometimes they, rather than the Indians, pose the greatest threat. The column moves slowly. Every day is pretty much the same: getting up before dawn, a long journey under the sun, a short rest by the water, and evening camp. But one day you notice several horsemen on a hill. They stand motionless and watch. The trail boss immediately raises his hand, a signal to stop. The cowboys gather closer to the herd. The horsemen slowly approach. They are Comanches. They look calm. But every cowboy knows that the Comanches are among the best horsemen and warriors on the Great Plains. Until recently, their bands controlled vast territories in Texas. The eldest of them stops his horse a few steps away from the trail boss. A short conversation begins. You can't hear all the words, but you understand the main point. This is a toll for passage. Such agreements were common on many cattle routes. Sometimes the tribes were paid with money, sometimes with a few bulls. After a few minutes, a decision is made. The trail boss gives them 2 animals. The Comanches calmly accept them and lead them away toward the hills. No hostility, no weapons. When they disappear over the horizon, one of the cowboys quietly says, "A cheap price for a peaceful journey." But peace on the trail rarely lasts long. A few days later, a storm begins. First, a strong wind picks up. The grass bends under its gusts. Then the sky darkens and heavy black clouds appear over the plain. The old cowboys immediately understand. This could be worse than a nighttime stampede, because thunderstorms scare cattle, and then the rain turns the ground into mud where horses can fall and wagons can get stuck. The first clap of thunder splits the sky. Lightning strikes somewhere nearby. The herd begins to get nervous. Thousands of animals moo and jostle each other. The horses sense the tension and stamp their hooves restlessly. The trail boss shouts, "Saddle up! Hold the herd!" The rain begins instantly. as if the sky is simply turning a bucket of water over onto the plain. The wind roars. Lightning illuminates the herd with short, blinding flashes, and you realize that if the animals break loose now, in the darkness, under the storm, and in the mud, it will be almost impossible to stop them. And at that very moment, what all the cowboys feared happens ahead. Part of the herd suddenly rushes toward the hills. The storm hits the plain with such force that it seems as if nature itself has decided to stop the drive. The rain pours down in sheets. The wind whips the grass and tears hats from heads. Lightning flashes every few seconds, illuminating the herd with a ghostly white light. And at that very moment, the worst happens. Part of the herd suddenly turns and rushes toward the hills. At first, it's dozens of animals, then hundreds. In a second, panic spreads through the entire herd like wildfire. Stampede. But now it's much worse than that first night, because the ground has turned to mud, the rain is blinding, and the thunder frightens the animals even more. Thousands of bulls begin to run blindly. The earth shakes from the pounding of hooves. The trail boss shouts commands, but the wind almost carries his voice away. The cowboys jump into their saddles and try to catch up with the edge of the herd. You spur your horse on. Dirt flies from under its hooves. The horse slips but continues to run. Ahead is a moving wall of horns and bodies. Harper appears beside you. He shouts, "To the ravine! They're heading for the ravine!" And then you realize the true horror of the situation. If the panicked herd reaches the ravine, the animals at the front will simply fall down. Those behind will continue running and trample them under thousands of hooves. This could destroy half the herd, and that means ruining the ranch owner and leaving the cowboys without pay. The trail boss makes a decision. The cowboys must overtake the herd and turn it around before it reaches the ravine. It's almost madness, but there is no other way. You, Harper, and a few other riders veer off to the side, trying to outrun the front of the herd. The horses gallop at full speed. The wind cuts into your face. Lightning flashes across the plain. Finally, you break ahead. Now comes the most dangerous part, crossing the path of the running herd. You turn your horse around and start shouting, waving your hat and lasso, trying to get the front bulls to change direction. Harper does the same on the other side. Several bulls turn sharply, then a few more. The herd begins to curve, but at that moment, one of the cowboys' horses slips in the mud. You see the rider fall right in front of the running animals. Harper instantly turns his horse around and rushes to him. He manages to grab the man by his jacket and literally pulls him out from under the hooves, risking his own life. Meanwhile, the herd begins to circle widely. The panicked run turns into chaotic spinning. After long, agonizing minutes, the speed gradually slows down. The animals are breathing heavily. Some stop, others just stand there, shaking their heads. The storm gradually moves further north. The rain subsides. As dawn begins to break through the clouds, the cowboys slowly gather around the herd. They are all dirty, wet, and exhausted. But the herd is still here. There are losses. Several dozen bulls died during the panic. But the main thing is that thousands of head of cattle are still on the trail. The trail boss looks at the plain for a long time, then says quietly, "We're almost in Kansas. And only now do you understand. The road has changed you. The guy who first sat in the saddle a few weeks ago is gone. In his place is a real cowboy of the great cattle drive, but there is still one more stage of the journey ahead. Because at the end of the trail awaits the city that in those years was called the wildest city in America, Abilene. A few days after the storm, the plain begins to change. The grass becomes shorter, roads appear, along with wagon tracks and rare farms. People are encountered more and more often, hunters, farmers, traders. This means one thing: Kansas is close. The cowboys sense it before they see the city. After months on the road, even the smell of smoke from chimneys seems unusual. And then one morning, buildings appear on the horizon. Abilene. In the late 1860s, this city became one of the main centers of cattle trade. It was here that the Chisholm Trail cattle drives ended. The Kansas Pacific Railroad was located here, along which cattle were sent onward to slaughterhouses in Chicago. But Abilene had another reputation. Newspapers of the time called it the wildest town on the frontier. As you approach the city, the road fills with other herds. Cowboys from all over Texas drive thousands of animals here. Dust fills the air. On the outskirts of town are huge stockyards. Here, buyers inspect the animals and make deals with ranch owners. The trail boss hands the herd over to the brokers. The counting begins. Each bull is carefully examined. People write down the numbers and check the brands on the hides. This takes almost a whole day. Finally, in the evening, it becomes clear that despite all the difficulties of the road, the ranch owner has brought almost the entire herd to Kansas. For him, this is a huge profit. And for the cowboys, it's the end of a long journey. The trail boss gathers everyone at the corral and begins to distribute the money they have earned. Everyone gets $30 for a month on the road. When it's your turn, he puts the coins in your hand and says briefly, "Not bad for your first drive." The cowboys head into town, and Abilene really is as it has been described. The main street is full of saloons. Music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses can be heard from the open doors. Cowboys, gamblers, traders, and hunters are everywhere. Some of your companions immediately disappear into the saloon doors. After months on the road, many cowboys spent almost their entire paycheck in one night on whiskey, cards, and entertainment. A man with a sheriff's star stands at the entrance to one of the saloons. This is Wild Bill Hickok, a real legend of the Wild West. In 1869, he really did serve as the Marshal of Abilene and tried to keep order in a town full of armed cowboys. He looks intently at the crowd and calmly keeps his hand near his revolver. In towns like this, shooting could start over the smallest thing. But today you don't want any trouble. You walk to the outskirts of town where the cattle pens still stand. The sun is slowly setting over the plain. Only now do you realize the road has ended. Thousands of kilometers of dust, sleepless nights, storms, and dangers are behind you. And you were part of what would later be called the Great Cattle Drives, an era that lasted only a few decades but became a legend of the American frontier. You spend several days in Abilene. The city is noisy and restless. During the day, cattle deals are made, and at night, the streets are filled with cowboys, music, and fights. Such cities on the railroad existed for one purpose, to buy Texas cattle and send it east. But even here, there is talk of the future. Old cowboys at the bar say that times are changing. Railroads are gradually being built further south, closer and closer to the Texas ranches themselves. Farmers on the plains are increasingly putting up barbed wire fences, dividing their land into private plots. This means that in a few decades, huge cattle drives across thousands of kilometers will almost disappear. But now it is the late 1860s, and the cowboy era is still in full swing. You stand on the outskirts of town and look at the railroad station. Long trains slowly carry cattle cars north and east. Somewhere far away in Chicago, these bulls will become meat for America's rapidly growing cities. And you understand a simple thing. Without drives like the one you participated in, the West would have developed much more slowly. Historians would later estimate that between 1867 and 1885 alone, cowboys drove more than 5 million head of cattle along trails like the Chisholm Trail. Thousands of young men from Texas, Mexico, former Civil War soldiers, African Americans, and immigrants became part of this great story. And most of them were guys just like you. young, without much of a future, but they are ready to spend 3 months in the saddle to earn their $30. In a few days, some of the cowboys will head back to Texas for the next drive. Others will stay to look for work on ranches in Kansas or further north. And you take one last look at the plains outside the city. Somewhere out there, far to the south, begins that very road, the Chisholm Trail, along which thousands of cattle and dozens of cowboys travel every spring. The road is difficult, dangerous, and endless, but it is this road that made cowboys one of the most famous symbols of American history. And now you know the truth that is rarely written about in legends. Cowboy life is not just about revolvers and heroism. It's dust, fatigue, cold nights, thunderstorms on the plains, and thousands of hooves around you. But it is there, amid the wind and endless grass, that a feeling is born that is difficult to explain in words. The feeling of the road. And one day, when the herd is gathered again in the spring to be driven north, there is a good chance that you will find yourself back in the saddle,